following program on Ada Derana 24 is classified for general audience. It is intended for all ages. It contains little or no violence, no strong language, and little or no sexual dialogue or situations.
A very good evening and thank you for joining us on this episode of Special Presentation. Today we're going to talk to you about a very important aspect in everybody's life, and that's on education. Now when it comes to education, of course, primary, secondary, we're all okay, government schools, international schools and whatnot. But when it comes to tertiary education and higher education in specific, we really have quite the plethora of options in present day. And of course, you have to really consider and weigh your options on what exactly is going to be the most advantageous route to take you through your higher education journey. So to talk about this specific topic, we have an individual that I believe is very well suited for this program, specifically because of just how much of an impact this university has had in Sri Lanka's education atmosphere and also about education across the globe. So tonight we're joined with Ms. Professor Caitlin Byrne, the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the Business School of the Griffith University in Australia. Professor, thank you so much for taking the time to actually come down here today to our studios and actually, give us a bit of a conversation on what the landscape for education looks like in Sri Lanka and also abroad right now. Without any other further ado, I'd like to get specifically the focus on Griffith University. Of course, I'm sure a lot of the audience watching tonight would have no doubt on how exactly Griffith University plays a role in Sri Lanka, specifically because we may have, people that actually attend Griffith University and have alumni. We constantly interact with people that have been to Australia for education specifically. So I'd like to ask you, recently as well, we saw that Griffith University actually reached a very important milestone, which is 50 years of excellence. I want to ask you, Professor, or Caitlin, if you'd like me to actually refer to you in that sense, since we had this conversation before. Could you please tell us about specifically the journey to 50 years of excellence when it comes to Griffith University?
Well, thank you firstly, Anurati, for having me on this show. It's an absolute pleasure. Such a delight to be in Sri Lanka as well. What a beautiful country. I wish I had longer to be here. But thank you also for acknowledging Griffith University. We're a really proud university that turns 50 this year. Griffith University opened its doors in 1975, and we welcomed about 460 students on our first day of teaching in that year. Since then, we've grown to be a university that is not just one campus, but 5 campuses, including online, but really situated across the southeast corner of Queensland in Australia, which is a very popular place and a beautiful place to live and work and study. And it's been a really interesting journey. We began as a university that wanted to do things differently. So our foundational disciplines were disciplines like environmental studies, modern Asian studies. And those 2 areas were areas that weren't really being picked up by other universities across Australia. And yet, we look at the landscape, the global landscape today, and we know how important it is for us to be thinking about our environment and its sustainability, how important the Asia-Pacific region is for us, and why that mattered, that we actually thought about those areas from our earliest days. We have grown. So as I said, we have 5 campuses now. We stretch across the southeast Queensland footprint. We have about 45,000 students, including international students, and including students and staff that come from Sri Lanka. So I think today we see ourselves not just as a small alternate university, we are a comprehensive university. We are research focused, so we now do extraordinary research in areas like spinal therapy research or new forms of drug discovery, as well as really important research around health and well-being, financial inclusion, sustainable finance, infrastructure. So a really different set of drivers that are very much focused on what are the cutting edge issues that we are facing as a globe today. And while a lot has changed for the university, a lot has stayed the same. We still hold very closely on to the values of social justice, environmental sustainability, and a real desire to work closely at home, but also within our region to make the world a better place. So making it matter is a really important hashtag or a really important part of our purpose.
Exactly. Caitlin, I really want to get to that specific tagline, make it matter. You know, when I was doing my research, that's what stood out to me the most. And also the fact that you've got 45,000 students enrolled, and the fact that Sri Lanka has contributed to some of the progress of Griffith University in itself, and how much of an intrinsic history we see. But before we get into, honestly, the historical aspect of it, I really want to address the fact that Griffith University is part of one of the top 2% of global universities. So that's no small feat, considering you mentioned that it might be considered an alternative university, but really how many alternative universities really have, themselves placed in the top 2% globally? Could you please tell us a little bit more about the fact that Griffith University is in such a high percentile and what it took to get there?
Well, as any university, we focus on key aspects of learning and teaching. So making sure that our education is a quality education, that it is relevant to the industry and workforce needs of the communities that we work in, and actually support students to build on the foundational skills they often come to university with, but to do more, to become leaders, to become active contributors to the society, as well as research, which is so important to our global rankings. And when you look at the rankings, whether you look at the Shanghai World Rankings, the QS rankings, the Times Higher Education rankings, Griffith University actually stands amongst some of the most prestigious universities in the world, being in the top 2%. That really does reflect a commitment to a very strong learning and teaching environment, thinking about the innovations we can bring into the classroom, making sure we have some of the top scholars around the world, and that we are delivering education that is regarded to be the best education in some of our key fields. For example, in nursing and midwifery, we are in the top 10 globally, but also in an area that sits within the business school, tourism and hospitality, we're number 1 in Australia, we're in the top 10 globally there as well. And the list goes on. I think we have a real commitment to being world leaders in the research space. And I think this reflects on an Australian commitment to education as well, in particular to higher education over a number of years. But it really does come back to the investment we put into the classrooms and the teaching environment, as well as and the scholars that we're able to attract to the university, but also to the way that we enable research that is relevant, that makes a difference and that has impact in the world. So all of those things go into the rankings. We're very proud of where we sit globally. I think one of the other things I'd say is that over the last decade in particular, we've tied a lot of what we do to how we sit against advancing the Sustainable Development Goals that were set out by the United Nations, and what we are doing to deliver on that agenda for 2030, and then of course how we're thinking about that for beyond 2030. So we're really proud of the work that we do, for example, in thinking about life underwater, in working on the climate action agenda, in thinking about women's empowerment, or also the role of institutions in really keeping our societies just and peaceful and fair. So all of those things wrap up, I think, to ensure that we are sitting really well globally, and we hope to stay there. Now that we're 50, the ambition continues.
Exactly, the big 50. And everything that you just mentioned, Caitlin, previously is pointing me towards one specific tagline, and that is make it matter. Now, you mentioned, of course, the fact that Griffith University is taking such precedence when it comes to making socially conscious efforts to ensure sustainability, to actually leave behind a planet that can actually sustain itself in the future. I'm sure even despite being a research institution which does not really have any obligation to, social responsibility in its sense with an active purpose, Griffith University still continues to further that cause, specifically when it comes to, its academic programs as well. I want to talk to you specifically on that aspect, as well as the fact that Griffith University has had such a profound impact and presence in Sri Lanka specifically, because of course it's no new information to any stranger that Sri Lanka and Australia have had a very long, strong standing bond when it comes to not just education, but just, in existence. We've had such a long partnership, if not the most long partnership. Could you tell us, Caitlin, about how exactly Griffith University actually, came to be this much of a prevalent force in Sri Lanka, specifically when it comes to the educational aspects?
It's interesting. I think some of this goes back well before Griffith University was established, and, there's a strong connection between Australia and Sri Lanka that emerged around and through an education agenda. And that really came out of the Colombo Plan of the 1950s. I think it was signed in 1951. That was really a shared multilateral approach to building capability and technical education capability right across South Asia and Southeast Asia. And Australia, as a founding member of that, then became home for a number of scholars that came out to our country under that plan, through scholarships, to gain their education and to bring that education back home. And many of those scholars became community leaders, leaders in politics and in industry. And I think Australia in particular has benefited so greatly from the relationships that emerged through those early connections through education. Certainly for Griffith University, and I can speak for my business school in particular, we have a number of faculty, a number of students who have come from Sri Lanka, who have very close ties to this country. Some who recently celebrated 35 years with our institution and maintained connections, including with the universities that they went through here in Sri Lanka as well. So I think we've been really keen, that we've seen a lot develop organically. People-to-people relationships have been really important, and Australia and Sri Lanka have very close people-to-people ties. Education is one aspect, sport might be another, and I think, I was thinking about watching the Test cricket over the recent summer and seeing the most beautiful cricket ground here in Sri Lanka, overlooking the ocean. I think we see those cricket connections are
that bond runs very deep,
incredibly rich.
Yes,
and then of course you can speak about food as well. But we do have really strong people-to-people cultural ties that really knit our relationship together at its core. More formally, I think, in recent years, we have been looking at how we formalise some of those relationships. So we've been here on this visit visiting the UPC in developing research grants and making sure we have a scholarship program that continues between Sri Lanka and Griffith University. We've also been visiting some of our partner institutions, including NIBM today, where we are looking at how we can do a lot more together in building opportunities for students to come to Griffith and to Australia to study, but also thinking about academic exchange and research collaborations and how we continue to build on the relationship. And I guess there's one person, in particular that stands out in my mind that really has been emblematic of this relationship, a PhD student who's recently graduated from Griffith University, Krish Nanapragasam, who has not only successfully completed his PhD, and it was really focused on sustainable fishing and overfishing in the waters around South Asia, in an area that he saw as being really impactful for Sri Lanka and for Australia. But he's gone on to do so many other things, both in our community and I think working with his community back here. So we have a lot to be really proud of in this relationship, both broadly between our two countries and then for us as an institution as well.
Exactly, and the fact that we can see such support that's being handed out and that influence in Sri Lanka translate into tangible results. For example, research of Krish that you mentioned, that we see that it's not just handing out of scholarship, but actually lives are changing and the people-to-people relationships continue developing and fostering, and there's an impact positively on a global scale. Hopefully, if we can see such research develop as well. Before we get into any more specifics, which I really want to when it comes to the local aspects, and also to talk about how the UGC has been in collaboration with Griffith University. Before we get into any of those specifics, let's take a short commercial break. You're watching Special Presentation. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Special Presentation. We're in conversation with Professor Caitlin Byrne, the Pro-Vice Chancellor for the Business School at Griffith University, Australia. Caitlin, we had quite the overarching discussion when it comes to the history of Griffith University and the importance of Sri Lanka-Australia ties when it comes to not just education, but also just in a culture in itself. And you left off on a very important point, which is the Sri Lankan aspect of the support that is being lended to Sri Lankan academics, specifically when it comes to higher education. Of course, you mentioned the UGC. There's an MOU that's in place, and I believe it was extended through your stay here for the past few days, which means that we're going to get a lot more benefits when it comes to fostering and nurturing education and academics in Sri Lanka. I want to talk to you specifically. I understand that there were about 15 PhD scholars that were fully funded through this program, which is, a massive feat to say the least, because that's 15 fully fledged research individuals that are going to be making a significant impact in the world. Can you please walk us through a little bit of what exactly this MOU actually stands to achieve in Sri Lanka, specifically when it comes to education?
Absolutely. And this is the work of the UGC is particularly important in terms of just lifting human development here in Sri Lanka, and the work that they're doing is incredibly important. We have seen 15 scholars already, as you mentioned. 12 of those came through the business school, and others picked up their degrees in health and sciences and in law. So this is quite a significant opportunity for academics working within the Sri Lankan academic system in state universities to build upon their credentials and gain a PhD through the scholarships that are awarded. What's particularly important about these scholarships is the commitment, both from the UGC, but also in this case from Griffith, to ensure that those scholarships are sufficient for each of the academics coming to have their tuition covered, but also some of their living costs and fees. And so each will be contributing a little bit more in terms of 15,000, I think that is a year, to ensuring that the academics that are successfully awarded the scholarship place are going to be able to best be in a position to see that through and successfully complete their studies, and then come back and continue to contribute to the academic life and the development of knowledge here in Sri Lanka. So I think that's particularly important. What we hope to do going forward is really build the connections that we have with all of the scholarship recipients, so the 15 that have been through, the 6 that are to come, and then each year to continue to build on that, to develop a network of influence that can continue to stay in touch with each other and build their own peer networks and inspire the next generation of academics coming through.
Exactly. It's the importance of how Griffith University aims to not just make a current standing impact, but actually be future focused. Specifically, I when doing my research as well, I understood exactly how different the curriculum and academia is when it comes to Griffith University in comparison to other academic institutions. When it comes to just how future focused Griffith University tends to be, specifically in the business school as well, we've seen, the inclusion of technology and the rapidly evolving nature of such is quite something that academia and as well as legislature have tended to, be slow in the uptake of. We have degrees that are really essentially almost useless when it comes to the current day. But thankfully, Griffith University doesn't have such a flaw, which I want to get into specifically. How exactly does Griffith University end up being so on the ball when it comes to relevancy of their academic profiles?
Well, I think this is an area that all institutions are really thinking about. For us, it has been a matter of not just thinking about the future, but actually what is the kind of future we need to be aiming towards? What are the challenges we're facing? Those challenges are increasingly in how we think about the impact of digital technologies, how we are working towards a decarbonised economy and addressing the impacts of a changing climate, how we're working in an increasingly geopolitically competitive and challenging environment where we see competition rather than collaboration as the game of the day, and the risks that brings with it, including to global supply chains, but also how we think about our economies. You know, economies are not just about who gets rich fastest. They're really thinking, increasingly we are thinking about a wellbeing economy framework, how we include more people in the economy rather than exclude, particularly those who are most marginalised. So I guess these have been some of the framing thoughts for us in thinking about the future we would like to see, the future that we kind of work with our industry partners about that they would also like to see. And at the same time, we've really tried to think about where are the key sectors, where are the workforce needs. We know, like many institutions, we're not going to have all of the answers for the future. But what we can do is really think about the kinds of skills that our students are going to need. Some of them are technical, absolutely. Many of them are about leadership. They're about communication and interpersonal skills. They're about navigating complexity. How we weave some of those foundational concepts, some people call them soft skills. In today's world, these are actually hard skills to acquire, to think about, to really embed in your approach. So we're trying to weave quite a few things into our degree programs with the aim that we will see a cohort of graduates who are able to navigate the very complex world that we continue to walk into and deliver a future that is not just about prosperity. We all want to see a shared prosperity, but is also thinking about the fate of the planet and the well-being of more people in that space as well.
Exactly. It's the fact that it's what you just mentioned, the fate of the planet, I believe. It lies, of course, in the most educated of people, specifically because the more you learn and understand about the rapidly evolving and changing landscape of Earth, the more that we can tend to, prepare for whatever may come, which is, how intuitive Griffith University's programs are looking like at the moment. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I want to ask you a very important question when it comes to actually considering Griffith University as basically a cut above the rest. Future plans. Caitlin, could you tell us about how exactly Griffith University aims to stay focused and also stay exactly where they are right now, or maybe even climb higher when it comes to the quality of education that's being received in Griffith University? What are the future plans looking like right
So there are a couple of things. We are looking very much at how we work more closely with our industry partners, and that's part of our core mission. Now, those industry partners are going to be in the health sector, in the energy and the energy renewables sector, in government and decision-making bodies, in tourism and hospitality, and across all, and in banking and finance. We're working with our industry partners to say, what are the big challenges you're seeing? For tourism, it's in sustainable tourism and the role of AI in thinking about visitor economies. For energy, it's in leadership required to transition us towards a different decarbonised or lower carbon economic future. And so in banking and finance, it's about dealing with financial crime, for example. So we're working much more closely with industry partners to tailor degree programs that are very relevant to the graduates of the future, that weave in those different sorts of skills. But there's another point I need to make, and that is that in 2032, the Olympics will be hosted in Brisbane. That is a huge opportunity for us. We will have the eyes of the world towards us. We can really think about how we showcase what the value of higher education is, working in partnership with industry and thinking about the kinds of roles that our graduates will have. We're working on a new campus that will be right in the heart of the CBD of Brisbane. It will be opening its doors in 2027. So that's a big shift for the university that turns 50 this year, to have a new campus We also have a fabulous campus on the Gold Coast, which will be another hub around that Olympics timeframe. So there is a lot on the agenda ahead, and I think we've got a lot to be very excited about, and hopefully we'll be welcoming more of your students from Sri Lanka to join us in that journey.
Exactly. Big plans. Unfortunately, I really wish we had more time to get into those specific plans as well, because I heard some things that might consider making me move to Brisbane maybe to pursue higher education. Looking like a really good opportunity at the moment, but unfortunately our time here does come to a close. Professor Kate Limburn, the Pro Vice Chancellor of the Business School of Griffith University, Australia, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to our viewers here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right, well, unfortunately, our time here has come to a close. If you had missed any of today's programs, you can always rewatch by catching us on our YouTube page, youtube.com/OtherDerana English. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great night.